I call the honourable member to Uraroa Flavel. Tēnā koe, Mr Flavel.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Ka nui te mihi kia koe tēnei pō.
Kei te pai.
Kia ora tātou. Mr Speaker, as other members of the House have said tonight, the bill amends the Victim Rights Act 2002, the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act 1989, the Parole Act 2002 and the Sentencing Act of 2002. And in establishing such a wide scope for the bill, then it's already a piece of legislation with a fairly wide brief. But I want to make a few comments on this bill, Mr Speaker, which provide an even broader context, and that is to include the context of Māori victimisation as our starting point for change. And if the Minister hadn't already come across it, I'd like to refer him to an excellent piece of research that was compiled by Fiona Cram from Ngāti Kahungunu, Leonie Pihema from Te Aotearoa Ngāti Mahanga, and Matawiki Kirihana from Ngāti and Tauranga, under the auspices of the International Research Institute for Māori and Indigenous Education, otherwise known as EDI. Mr Speaker, their report, it's called Meeting the Needs of Māori Victims of Crime, is set in the context that Māori victimisation rates are high. In fact, in the 2006 New Zealand Crime and Safety Survey, the rate of Māori victimisation is 1.3 times the European rate. Assaults, threats and damage to personal property were the major crime types contributing to the high rates of personal victimisation for Māori. Māori have a prevalence rate 2 to 3 times that of Europeans for all of these offences, offence types, and especially high rates of violent offences by partners and other people well known to the victim. But even more depressing, a person's chances of being multiply victimised was higher if they were Māori. Irrespective of the type of crime or the incident, prevalence or crime concentration rates, these differences for Māori victims were very much real, sir. These factors therefore form the foundation for how we should understand the key priorities and target areas to emerge from this Victims of Crime Reform Bill. Mr Speaker, the purpose of the bill is to strengthen the existing provisions for victims of crime, expand the rights of victims of serious offences, and ensure victims' rights in the adult criminal jurisdiction are applied in the youth justice jurisdiction. So these are 3 very important factors which we naturally support as a consequence of the significance we place upon supporting all of those who have fallen victim to the abuse of crime. But I did want to raise a few questions which Cram, Pihama and Kirihana first identified. Mr Speaker, they suggest to us that the term victim is often seen as problematic because of its association as a solely individual experience, whereas a transgression impacts on those linked by whakapapa to the transgressed and to Māori as a whole. To put this in a more simpler context, when a person hits a Māori person, they are in fact hitting also all of those who are joined as descendants and ancestors to that individual. The damage to one is damage to all. Another issue they raised is that the term victim often implies powerlessness, and as such the labelling of someone as a victim may hinder resolution. Cram, Pihama and Kirihana also challenged this House to consider that notions of both victim and crime must be viewed within the historical context. For Māori, this context is the history of colonisation within this country. So I think these concepts are really important to think about as we look at the proposals in this bill to 1, enhance the victim notification system, 2, to increase the rights of victims of offending by children and young persons, 3, to strengthen the accountability of agencies and extending the application of general rights of victims, and 4, to improve provisions for victim impact statements. So we believe that what is most important and what is most needed is a holistic approach to the reduction of crime. By looking at both the perpetrator, the offender and the causes of crime, including poverty, lack of education and institutional racism. We need to focus on the existing justice system to ensure that healing and resolution is acknowledged as a crucial platform for victims. Mr Speaker, the Māori Party seeks to promote restorative justice systems where victims are empowered and to advocate to enhance community involvement in the justice process. In many respects, therefore, the proposals included in this legislation help to strengthen the opportunities for support for whānau through care and concern for victims, which we absolutely endorse. We're particularly pleased at the initiative to improve provisions for victim impact statements, as covered by Mr Graham. This is an initiative, of course, which came through clearly from the traumatic events around the court hearings associated with the tragedy of Sophie Elliott. And we think that it's important to acknowledge that no family should ever go through the ordeal again of having their statements altered. I do want to conclude the debate with 4 key recommendations that arise out of the work quoted earlier, namely meeting the needs of Māori victims of crime. Mr Speaker, these recommendations are: 1, that mainstream support services be encouraged to become more accessible, user-friendly, culturally appropriate for victims, Māori victims of crime. 2, that a kaupapa Māori service be established for Māori victims of crime. That a kaupapa Māori service be resourced as a one-stop shop for Māori victims of crime. And finally, that the Māori processes of resolution be resourced. So there are other ways and other matters that must be given due attention as well. Research has demonstrated that ethnic minority offenders are more likely to be the victim of violence while in custody. We would like to know whether this is taken into account within the legislation. Excuse me. The validity of victim recall studies has been widely questioned due to problems with victim memory decay and tendency for victims to revert to racial stereotypes of offenders, and perhaps most crucially, sir, the fact that only a small subset of crimes are actually witnessed by the victim. So we seek some response from the Minister and indeed the community through the Select Committee stage as to whether this is an issue adequately addressed in this bill. And finally, we note that the collection and use of ethnic data in the justice sector in New Zealand was recently reviewed by Statistics New Zealand. The review concluded that there is little need for all justice databases, or data sets at least, to be able to be disaggregated by ethnicity and by age, gender and location to establish and monitor the extent of offending by victimisation of Māori and interventions that work well for Māori. It was further noted that ethnicity data collected by New Zealand Police and also utilised by the Ministry of Justice did not comply with the New Zealand statistical standard for ethnicity, and as a consequence, sir, New Zealand police data was not compatible with ethnicity data from other official sources. So, Mr Speaker, these latter matters and issues are raised in the very comprehensive research compiled by Bronwyn Morrison entitled Identifying and Responding to Bias in the Criminal Justice System, a review of international and New Zealand research, and this was produced just last year. So we would hope that all of these questions, all of these issues may form part of the ongoing debate in supporting and protecting victims of crime as part of families and as part of our communities. We support this particular bill at its first reading.
I call the